we're going to look at is the slump mold. So in this technique, we will be slumping the clay into the mold. So again, these are some that we have around the studio, and then I'll show you something more like you might have access to at home. These all have a little bit of a rectangle shape. That's just a coincidence. These also could be any shape, but this is a plaster mold. This is something like we would have at home, just a random vessel. This is made of metal, and this is just 4 pieces of wood put together. So I'm going to show you how to use this one. I'll show you really quick how to use this type. The first thing we're going to do is roll out our clay. Again, I used my big rolling pin and I made a pretty big slab, but you can make a smaller slab at home using your small rolling pin or a wine bottle or a water bottle. Then we're going to select our slump mold. So I'm going to use this one. This one is kind of cool because it's a little more ornate. Because this is made of metal, the clay will, the wet clay will just stick to it. So we're going to be protecting this with newspaper or plastic. Because we're going to be slumping this into our mold, it's actually going to use a little more clay to fill it up. So what I like to do is put my mold down and then do a bit of an outline, but I give myself a little bit more room, like a 1/2 inch or an inch. And this has a kind of a scallop edge, so I'm going to sort of follow that. But you don't have to. All right, now I'm going to remove my extra slab. All right, because I don't want the clay to touch the metal and stick forever, I'm actually going to put some plastic down, but I'm going to put the plastic right on the clay. And hopefully this will cut down on a bit of the clay or the plastic moving around as the clay goes down, as well as plastic impressions that I'm going to need to clean up later. So my plastic is on the clay. Now I'm going to take my slab carefully and I'm going to place it on top, kind of centered, and I'm going to lift the edge and gently push down. Lift and push. Lift and push. And gently, because I don't want to stress or break the clay, but I'm going to do this until I have the clay sitting in the vessel all the way. And then I can gently start to press. I'm not trying to thin the clay out, I'm just getting it firmly seated in the mold so that it takes on the shape. So, I don't know if you can see, but I'm basically just pressing to make sure, gently, I'm not leaving any fingerprints or pokes, I'm just gently pushing to make sure that it is seated in the bottom of the mold. Okay, so once I've done that, now I can pull the plastic out. So I have a little extra. It's much better, in my opinion, to have a little extra than not enough, although it is totally an option to make a different shape. So for example, I could make something like this shape. I could cut along those lines and make something that is that eyeball shape inside a mold like this. That would be totally fine. It's totally up to me. Now I have a couple choices. I could either leave that scalloped edge as it is. I could trim it to match up with my pot, or I could, do additional decoration. So I'll show you a little bit of each choice. So trimming it would look like this. Pulling that plastic down, bringing my tool to where the mold is, and then just tracing it. Okay, and then getting rid of that. So now I have something that is more closely aligned to the mold, and that's great. I do have a pretty slabby edge, so I might clean that up a little bit. Now if I wanted to add a little bit of an additional decorative edge, I could instead do something like do a cutout in really any shape I want. So you can see I have kind of an edge here. We're gonna finish off these edges in the next stage, but this is the setup. Once we've got our basic plate the way we want it, we're going to let it hang out until it is close to leather hard, hard enough to support itself. Because we're sitting it in a metal container with plastic, if I covered this with plastic, it's never going to dry. So I'm gonna have to leave it uncovered, which means I need to monitor it really closely until it gets to that stage where it can support itself. If you start to take it out, which you'll use the plastic to, and you notice that it's flopping or bending at all, it's not ready yet, so let it go. So if we're using this type of slump mold, which can really be any size or shape, it could even be like an octagon shape if you have the wood cut that way. I'm going to have my slab, which I've rolled and I have ribbed on both sides, and I'm going to cut the shape out again a little bit bigger than I want it because we're going to be slumping. And again, I can really cut this in a shape. I could make a regular rectangle. I'm actually going to make a rectangle with a little detail on the edge. I'm just eyeballing my cuts, but you could actually measure them out, put them on a piece of paper, and use a template if you want it to be more exact. Either way is totally great. All right, so let's get rid of that extra slab. Sometimes it's helpful to set it on a board so it's easy to move later. All right, so now I'm going to lift up my slab, gently place it over my mold. I do like to kind of center it. And then again, I'm going to gently pick up and push down until I have it sort of evenly in. All right, so I'm just doing this very gently. I am just trying to even out the sides. And then again, I'm going to gently push the rim down. If I do any of these motions too vigorously, I run the risk of weakening or breaking the clay. And then that's no big deal. I would just have to start over again with a fresh slab of clay. All right, so I've done that. And remember, we're not thinning the clay at all. I do have just a little bit of unevenness, but that's no worries. I can trim this later. For now though, I'm going to let it get harder until it can support itself. Let's go ahead and check on our slump molds. So we have kind of two different situations here. Over here, this one is a pretty thin slab, and it's been sitting on this wood, which is also absorbent, as we know. And so it is very sturdy. It is definitely leather hard. A way to know if it's leather hard, it's not dusty looking, so it's not bone dry, but if I try to bend it, it doesn't bend. That's how we know it's leather hard. So this is in a perfect stage to go ahead and add some feet. If you made feet ahead of time, we can add those on right now. But actually this one has a flaw, and I want to show it to you, because with clay, certain flaws are going to give us a big headache later. So this one has this little crack that formed here. This might have been from my cutting. There might have just been something in the clay. This is recycled clay. But in any case, this crack right here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this and just remake this dish, because this crack is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the clay is fired and then glaze fired. So I'm actually going to just toss this one and make another one. And then over here in our other slump mold, where our clay is sitting in a metal dish with plastic around it, it is still very wet. It is definitely a bit more stiff, but if I tried to take this out and work with it now, it would definitely be a little bit floppy. Now the thing is that when we're working with slab dishes like this, we don't want them to be moving at all when we're working with them, because that is going to weaken the walls of our dish and could end up being a crack later on. So I'm going to let this sit out open to the air for a little bit longer before I put feet on it. But while I'm waiting for that to happen, I'm going to make the feet for this piece. So in the hump mold video, we talked about 2 ways to put feet on, with a foot ring or with little feet like we did on our pinch pots. You could use both of those methods here, and if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that now. But I'm going to show you an additional method that you can use, and you can really innovate and do all kinds of different things using these 3 methods as a jumping off point. So I have a slab here, and I'm going to go ahead and cut a strip out of it. This strip is 3 centimeters wide. I just randomly chose that. And from that strip, I'm going to cut 2 equal long strips. These are 3 inches long each, and I'm going to, because I still can, go ahead and give them a little bit of a curve. I could make this slab thicker, up to 1/4 of an inch. This is probably 1/8 of an inch, like a little less than 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. And so I just gave these a little curve. And my plan is going to be to set these up on here so they match this curve, and those will be my feet. I do want them to get just a touch more dry, but I don't want them to get too much more dry, and I want this to get to leather hard. So I'm going to manage that drying and then put these pieces together. Alright, so this has been hanging out for a while. It's pretty dry. These are about the same dryness. So I'm going to add my feet. I'm going to use this as a little bit of a stand to hold my pot up so that I don't mess up this scalloped edge. It does need to be cleaned up, but I don't want to squish or break any of that. So I'm going to use this as a little holder. And these feet are going to go like this. And like I said, you can, play with this. These could be thicker, they could be shorter. Your point is just to make some feet for this to stand up on to get the pot off of the table. It's a decorative choice, and however you want to do it is fine. I'm just giving you another foot option. So I'm going to use my needle tool to sketch out where my feet are going. And as usual, I'm going to scratch and score. When I have a more precise little area like this, I just use the needle tool. It does take a little longer than the fork, but I'm able to be a bit more precise. As always, I'm going to do lots of scratching and scoring, lots of cross hatching. Is this enough? No, it's not enough yet. Let's really mess this up. I'm trying to just do this edge, just scratch and score on the edge. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I'm going to go ahead and Velcro that. Again, I'm not squishing it. I don't really want to change the shape of my foot, and I don't want to squish my vessel. I just want to make sure this is really well attached. And then I'm going to use, again, that not very wet brush just to smooth this. I could go in with my wooden rib or another tool that fits well in there if I want to. Again, if we need to remove some water from the area, we can use a sponge with all of the water squeezed out. Okay, and so now we need to, this is why we want this to be leather hard, because when we flip this over, If it's not leather hard, it will collapse between the legs or sag between the legs, and we don't want that. All right, so there's our cute little pot. I'm gonna clean up the edges. And decorate and go from there.